The morning of August 14, 1992, dawned grey and humid over the Rainier Valley neighborhood of Seattle. The kind of Pacific Northwest summer day where the air hung thick with the promise of rain that never quite came. In a modest two-story house on South Henderson Street, Elena Roberts was already awake at 5:30, brewing coffee in the same chipped ceramic mug she'd used for 15 years, watching the steam curl up toward the kitchen window that overlooked their small backyard garden. She could hear the floorboards creaking upstairs as her husband Miguel got ready for his shift at the Boeing plant, the same routine they'd maintained since moving to Seattle from East LA in 1978. Elena Roberts never imagined she'd become the matriarch of what the Seattle Times would later call the most methodical act of revenge in the city's criminal history. At 42, she was a woman who kept her graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, who worked double shifts at Swedish Medical Center as a surgical technician, who made sure her 3 children did their homework every night at the kitchen table while she prepared dinner. She was the kind of woman who knew every neighbor's name, who brought casseroles to new families on the block, who volunteered at the local community center every Saturday morning. Her hands, small and precise from years of surgical work, would within 6 months be responsible for planning the systematic elimination of 16 members of the Vargas crime family. The Roberts family had lived quietly in Rainier Valley for 14 years, becoming part of the fabric of this working-class neighborhood where Filipino, Latino, and African-American families had built a community around shared struggles and small victories. Miguel Roberts worked the night shift at Boeing, coming home with grease under his fingernails and pride in his voice when he talked about the planes he helped build. Their eldest son, David, was 21, and had just finished his 2nd year at the University of Washington on a partial scholarship, studying mechanical engineering like his father had always dreamed of doing. Their daughter Carmen, 19, worked at a local bakery while taking classes at Seattle Central Community College, her bright laugh echoing through the house every evening when she returned home with day-old pastries for the family. The youngest, Antonio, was 17 and a senior at Franklin High School. A quiet kid who spent most of his time reading in his room or helping his mother tend to her vegetable garden. At 7 minutes past 6 that August morning, Antonio Roberts walked out of his family's front door to catch the bus to his summer job at a grocery store in Columbia City. He moved with the careful, measured steps of a teenager who'd learned to avoid attention, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he kept his eyes focused on the sidewalk. Antonio had inherited his mother's precise hands and his father's steady temperament, but he'd also inherited something else that would prove fatal for 16 men. A quiet intensity that masked a capacity for methodical planning that rivaled any criminal mastermind the Pacific Northwest had ever seen. The number 7 bus that morning was running 12 minutes late, which meant Antonio stood at the corner of Rainier Avenue and South Henderson Street longer than usual, long enough to notice the black Cadillac Eldorado that had been parked across the street for the past 3 days, long enough to see the 2 men inside who seemed to be watching his house, long enough to memorize the license plate number without appearing to look directly at the car. These were skills Antonio had developed not through any criminal training, but through the hyper-awareness that comes from being a bookish Latino kid in a neighborhood where showing weakness could be dangerous. The Vargas family had controlled drug distribution and protection rackets in South Seattle for over a decade, their influence stretching from the International District to Tukwila, built on a foundation of methodical violence and strategic corruption. Carlos Vargas Sr., 63 years old, and the undisputed patriarch, had emigrated from Guadalajara in 1963 and built his criminal empire 1 block at a time, always staying just below the threshold that would bring serious federal attention. His operation was sophisticated enough to launder money through legitimate businesses, brutal enough to maintain absolute territorial control, and family-oriented enough that his 3 sons and 2 nephews held key positions in the organization. Carlos Vargas Jr., 38, served as his father's enforcer and primary lieutenant, a man whose reputation for creative violence had kept the family's territories free from serious challenges for over 8 years. He drove the black Cadillac, wore expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the shoulder holster underneath, and had never forgotten an insult or failed to collect a debt. His younger brother Ramon, 34, handled the financial side of the operation, moving money through a network of small businesses and offshore accounts with the precision of a trained accountant. The youngest brother, Esteban, was 29 and managed street-level operations, overseeing the dealers and collectors who formed the backbone of the family's daily income. The Vargas nephews, Luis and Fernando Morales, had been brought into the organization after their father was killed in a rival gang dispute in Los Angeles 5 years earlier. Luis, 26, specialized in intimidation and debt collection, while Fernando, 24, had developed a reputation as the family's most reliable killer, a man who could make problems disappear permanently without leaving evidence that would satisfy police investigations. Together, the extended Vargas family controlled an operation that generated over $2 million annually while maintaining the appearance of legitimate businessmen. The tension between the Roberts family and the Vargas organization began 3 weeks before that August morning, on a sweltering Tuesday evening when Carmen Roberts finished her shift at Morales Bakery on Rainier Avenue South. She'd been working there for 8 months, saving money for college while learning the business from the elderly owner, Mrs. Esperanza Morales, who had no idea that her deceased husband's nephews had become enforcers for the most dangerous criminal family in South Seattle. Carmen had always been the heart of the Roberts family, the one who could make her serious father laugh, who helped her younger brother with homework, who brought home stories from work that kept the dinner table lively with conversation. That Tuesday evening, Carmen was locking up the bakery at 9:15 when Fernando Morales approached her in the parking lot behind the building. Fernando had been watching Carmen for weeks, had made comments to his cousin Luis about the pretty girl who worked at their aunt's bakery, had convinced himself that his family's criminal reputation made him irresistible to working-class girls who should be grateful for his attention. He was wearing a silk shirt that cost more than Carmen made in 2 weeks, gold chains that caught the light from the street lamp, and the kind of confident smile that had never been told no by anyone who understood what saying no might cost them. Carmen Roberts had never heard of Fernando Morales, had no idea that he was connected to organized crime, knew nothing about the Vargas family or their control over the neighborhood's underground economy. To her, he was just another guy hitting on her in a parking lot, the kind of situation she'd learned to handle with firm politeness and quick exits. When Fernando stepped close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the gold caps on his teeth, when he told her she was beautiful and suggested they go for a drive in his new BMW, Carmen responded the way she'd been taught by her mother and her own experience. She said thank you, but no, she had to get home to help with dinner. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but would ultimately claim 16 lives and destroy 2 families completely. Fernando Morales, accustomed to fear and compliance, unused to rejection from anyone in his neighborhood, interpreted Carmen's polite refusal as disrespect that needed to be corrected immediately. He grabbed her wrist when she tried to walk past him, pulled her close enough that she could feel his breath on her face, and told her that girls who worked in his family's businesses didn't get to say no to him. Carmen, frightened now and trying to pull away, told him to let go of her, that she didn't want any trouble. Fernando's response was to push her against the brick wall of the bakery and force his mouth against hers, his hand tangled in her hair, his body pinning her in place while she struggled. The kiss lasted exactly 11 seconds, timed later by investigators who measured the distance Carmen's car keys traveled when she dropped them during the struggle. 11 seconds of sexual assault that Fernando Morales considered a minor lesson in respect, a brief demonstration of power that should have ended with Carmen understanding her place in the neighborhood hierarchy. Instead, those 11 seconds triggered a sequence of events that would make the Roberts family the most wanted fugitives in Washington state and reduce the Vargas organization to a collection of unmarked graves scattered across 3 counties. Carmen broke free when Fernando loosened his grip to reach for her phone number, which she'd written on a piece of paper, and tried to throw at him as a distraction. She ran to her car, locked the doors, and drove home in tears, her hands shaking so badly she had to pull over twice to compose herself before continuing. When she walked through the front door of the house on South Henderson Street at 9:47 that evening, her family was watching television in the living room, her father in his recliner with a beer, her mother folding laundry on the couch, her brother David reading a textbook at the kitchen table. The sight of Carmen's torn blouse and smeared makeup brought all conversation to an immediate halt. Elena Roberts recognized the signs of sexual assault from her years working in hospital emergency rooms, had seen too many women arrive with that same combination of shock, shame, and barely controlled panic. She guided Carmen to the kitchen table, sent David to get his father, and spent the next hour listening to her daughter describe what had happened in the bakery parking lot while Miguel Roberts paced the kitchen floor with an expression that promised violence. Antonio, who had been in his room studying, came downstairs when he heard his sister crying and listened to her story with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for his favorite books. The Roberts family's initial response was exactly what any working-class family would do when their daughter was sexually assaulted. They called the police. Officer Jennifer Martinez arrived at 11:20 that evening, took Carmen's statement, photographed the torn clothing and minor injuries, and promised to investigate the incident thoroughly. She seemed genuinely concerned and professional, taking notes in a small notebook while Carmen described Fernando Morales and his BMW, writing down the license plate number Carmen had managed to remember despite her trauma. What Officer Martinez didn't tell the Roberts family was that she recognized Fernando's name immediately, knew exactly who he was and what family he belonged to, understood that prosecuting a sexual assault case against a Vargas family member would be career suicide and potentially physically dangerous. Martinez had been patrolling South Seattle for 6 years, had learned which cases got solved and which cases disappeared into paperwork, had developed the kind of pragmatic cynicism that keeps police officers alive in neighborhoods where criminal organizations have more resources than law enforcement. The case file for Carmen Roberts' sexual assault disappeared from the Seattle Police Department's active investigations within 72 hours. Officer Martinez submitted her initial report, but the detective assigned to follow up found reasons to prioritize other cases, to question Carmen's identification of her attacker, to suggest that pursuing charges against Fernando Morales would require evidence that simply didn't exist. The official explanation was insufficient evidence to proceed. The unofficial explanation was that some cases weren't worth the risk they posed to officers and their families. Miguel Roberts learned that no charges would be filed against his daughter's attacker when he called the police department on the following Monday morning. Detective Ray Kowalski, a 20-year veteran with a mortgage and 2 kids in college, explained in carefully neutral language that sexual assault cases were difficult to prosecute, that witness identification could be unreliable, that the department had to prioritize cases where conviction was more likely. He never mentioned Fernando Morales by name, never acknowledged that the suspect's family connections had influenced the decision, never admitted that the Seattle Police Department had effectively given the Vargas organization permission to assault working-class women without consequences. That Monday evening, August 24, 1992, the Roberts family held what would later be called their war council around the kitchen table where they'd shared thousands of meals over the past 14 years. Eleanor Roberts, who had never received a traffic ticket, sat across from her husband Miguel, who had never been in a fight since high school, while their 3 children listened to a conversation that would transform them from a law-abiding family into the most effective criminal organization in Seattle history. The decision they reached that night was unanimous. If the legal system wouldn't protect Carmen, the Roberts family would handle the situation themselves. Antonio Roberts, 17 years old and 3 months away from starting his senior year of high school, volunteered to be the family's intelligence gatherer. His quiet nature and academic reputation made him nearly invisible in the neighborhood, the kind of teenager who could sit in coffee shops or stand at bus stops for hours without attracting attention. Over the next 6 weeks, Antonio compiled what amounted to a complete dossier on the Vargas family operation, their daily routines, business locations, family relationships, criminal associates, and personal vulnerabilities. The information Antonio gathered revealed the full scope of what the Roberts family was preparing to take on. The Vargas organization employed over 40 people in various capacities, controlled drug distribution in a territory that generated millions of dollars annually, and had corrupted enough police officers and city officials to operate with virtual impunity. Fernando Morales, the man who had assaulted Carmen, was protected by a network of killers, bribes, and family loyalty that had prevented his arrest for crimes ranging from assault to murder over the past 5 years. Elena Roberts, drawing on the methodical precision she'd learned in surgical theaters, began developing what she called the plan during her sleepless nights in September 1992. Working alone at the kitchen table after the rest of the family had gone to bed, she filled notebook after notebook with diagrams, timelines, and contingency procedures that read like military operations manuals. Her plan wasn't simply to kill Fernando Morales, the man who had assaulted her daughter. Elena Roberts intended to systematically eliminate every member of the Vargas organization who posed a threat to her family, starting with the leadership and working down through the ranks until the entire criminal network was destroyed. The first phase of Elena's plan required the Roberts family to acquire skills and resources they'd never needed during their law-abiding years in Rainier Valley. Miguel Roberts, who had spent 23 years building airplanes, began teaching himself advanced chemistry and electronics through books borrowed from the public library and technical manuals stolen from Boeing. David Roberts, the engineering student, designed improvised explosive devices using knowledge gained from his university coursework and materials purchased from hardware stores across King County. Carmen Roberts, despite being the victim who had triggered the family's transformation, insisted on learning surveillance techniques and weapons handling, arguing that she had more right than anyone to participate in the destruction of the organization that had protected her attacker. By November 1992, the Roberts family had established what federal investigators would later describe as the most sophisticated domestic terrorist cell in Washington state history. Their basement had been converted into a weapons workshop where Miguel Roberts assembled untraceable firearms using parts purchased at gun shows throughout the Pacific Northwest. The garage housed Antonio's intelligence operation, with detailed maps of Vargas family territories, photographs of key personnel, and timing charts that tracked the daily movements of every significant member of the organization. Elena's notebooks, hidden in a waterproof container buried beneath her vegetable garden, contained assassination plans for each of their 16 targets, complete with backup strategies and escape routes. The Roberts family's transformation from law-abiding citizens to methodical killers was gradual enough that none of them fully recognized what they were becoming until it was too late to stop. Eleanor Roberts still worked her shifts at Swedish Medical Center, maintaining the facade of normalcy while using her access to medical supplies and pharmaceutical databases to research untraceable poisons and trauma treatment. Miguel Roberts continued reporting to Boeing every night, but spent his days learning how to manufacture explosive devices and modify firearms for maximum lethality. David Roberts maintained his grades at the University of Washington while using the engineering library to research demolitions and ballistics. Carmen Roberts served coffee and pastries at the bakery, smiling at customers while memorizing the schedules and habits of her attacker's associates. Antonio Roberts attended Franklin High School, earning straight A's while developing the kind of surveillance skills that would have impressed professional intelligence operatives. The first killing occurred on December 15, 1992, a grey Tuesday morning when Luis Morales, Fernando's cousin and the Vargas family's primary debt collector, stopped at a Starbucks on Rainier Avenue South for his usual large coffee with extra cream. Luis Morales was 26 years old, had never been arrested despite being suspected in over a dozen violent assaults, and had developed a reputation for collecting debts through methods that left victims permanently disabled rather than dead. He drove a modified Chevelle that he'd bought with money stolen from small business owners, wore a leather jacket that concealed a shoulder holster, and carried brass knuckles in his right pocket that bore the dental impressions of at least 8 different victims. Elena Roberts had been studying Luis Morales for 3 months, learning his routines with the patience of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. She knew he stopped at the same Starbucks every Tuesday and Friday morning at exactly 7:45, always ordered the same drink, always sat at the same table near the window where he could watch his car in the parking lot. She knew he suffered from mild diabetes that required daily insulin injections, that he lived alone in a studio apartment above a pawn shop, that he trusted no one enough to vary his routines or watch his back consistently. The method Elena chose for Luis Morales reflected both her medical knowledge and her complete commitment to the systematic destruction of the Vargas organization. Working in her basement laboratory, she had synthesized a modified insulin compound that would cause fatal hypoglycemic shock while appearing to be a natural diabetic emergency. The compound, injected through a modified pen that resembled an expensive fountain pen, would be absorbed quickly enough to cause death within 15 minutes while being virtually undetectable in standard autopsy procedures. On that December morning, Elena Roberts arrived at the Starbucks 20 minutes before Luis Morales' usual schedule, ordered a simple coffee, and positioned herself at a table with clear sightlines to his preferred seating area. She wore the kind of unremarkable business casual clothing that made middle-aged women invisible in coffee shops, carried a leather portfolio that suggested she was preparing for a meeting, and had practiced the injection technique hundreds of times using oranges and raw chicken breasts until the motion was as automatic as suturing a wound. Luis Morales entered the Starbucks at 7:46 that morning, 1 minute later than his usual schedule, wearing his leather jacket and the kind of predatory awareness that had kept him alive in a dangerous profession for 8 years. He ordered his coffee, scanned the shop for potential threats or opportunities, and settled into his usual table without noticing the middle-aged Latina woman reading what appeared to be medical journals at a nearby table. His attention was focused on the parking lot where his Chevelle was parked, watching for rivals or police surveillance that might interfere with his day's collection activities. Elena Roberts approached Luis Morales' table at 7:52, 6 minutes after he'd received his coffee, carrying her portfolio and wearing the kind of professional smile she'd perfected during years of dealing with difficult patients and demanding doctors. She asked if he minded sharing his table since the coffee shop was busy, a reasonable request that Luis granted without suspicion, gesturing to an empty chair while continuing to watch the parking lot through the window. Elena positioned herself within arm's reach of her target, opened her portfolio to reveal what appeared to be medical charts, and began the casual conversation that would provide cover for murder. The injection occurred at 7:54, delivered through Luis Morales' leather jacket with the modified pen, while Elena asked him for directions to Swedish Medical Center. The compound entered his bloodstream instantly, beginning the biochemical process that would shut down his nervous system within 12 minutes, while appearing to be a diabetic emergency brought on by stress and irregular eating habits. Luis felt the prick of the needle, but attributed it to a loose spring in his chair, never suspecting that the polite woman, asking for directions, had just delivered a fatal dose of synthetic insulin to his circulatory system. Elena Roberts left the Starbucks at 7:56, 2 minutes after administering the lethal injection, and thanking Luis Morales for his help and wishing him a good day with the kind of warm sincerity that made witnesses remember her as a thoughtful woman rather than a cold-blooded killer. She walked to her car in the adjacent parking lot, drove 3 blocks to a different coffee shop, and purchased another cup of coffee while establishing an alibi with her credit card and friendly conversation with the barista, who would later tell police about the nice lady who'd asked about holiday specials. Luis Morales began experiencing symptoms of severe hypoglycemia at 8:03, 9 minutes after Elena's injection and 7 minutes before her modified insulin compound reached maximum effectiveness. Initially, he attributed his dizziness and nausea to the previous night's drinking, but when his vision began to blur and his hands started shaking uncontrollably, he realized something was seriously wrong with his blood sugar levels. He reached for his emergency glucose tablets, a precaution he'd learned to take after several close calls with diabetic shock, but his coordination was already deteriorating too rapidly for him to open the container. The Starbucks employees called 911 at 8:07 when Luis Morales collapsed at his table, convulsing violently while foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, found him unconscious, with vital signs indicating severe hypoglycemic shock, and administered emergency glucose while transporting him to Harborview Medical Center. Luis Morales was pronounced dead at 8:31 that morning, 12 minutes after arriving at the hospital, 17 minutes after Elena Roberts' synthetic insulin compound had begun shutting down his brain functions. The autopsy performed by King County Medical Examiner Dr. Patricia Hawkins found elevated insulin levels consistent with diabetic emergency, but the compound Elena Roberts had synthesized was designed to mimic natural insulin, closely enough to avoid detection through standard toxicology screening. Dr. Hawkins ruled Luis Morales' death accidental, the result of diabetic shock caused by irregular medication and poor dietary habits, never suspecting that she was examining the first victim of what would become the most systematic revenge-killing spree in Seattle history. The Vargas family's response to Luis Morales' death was initially muted, accepting the medical examiner's findings while quietly investigating whether their debt collector had been killed by rivals or victims. Carlos Vargas Sr. assigned Fernando Morales and 2 associates to review Luis's recent collection activities, looking for someone desperate enough to risk killing a member of their organization. Their investigation focused on small business owners and gambling debtors who might have hired professional killers, never suspecting that a middle-class family from Rainier Valley had declared war on their entire operation. Elena Roberts waited exactly 37 days before executing the second phase of her plan, allowing enough time for police attention to fade while maintaining the methodical schedule that would eventually claim 15 more lives. During those 37 days, Antonio Roberts continued his surveillance operations, confirming that the Vargas organization had not connected Luis Morales' death to the Roberts family, or even recognized it as murder. The family's cover remained intact, allowing them to proceed with assassination plans that would target the organization's financial operations and street-level management. Fernando Morales, the man whose assault on Carmen Roberts had triggered the family's transformation into killers, was scheduled to die third in Elena's carefully planned sequence. Her decision to kill him third, rather than first, reflected strategic thinking rather than emotional satisfaction, recognizing that Fernando's death would generate more intensive investigation than the deaths of peripheral members like Luis. Elena intended to eliminate the Vargas organization's capacity to function before killing the man who had assaulted her daughter, ensuring that Fernando would die knowing his family's criminal empire was collapsing around him. The second killing occurred on January 21st, 1993, targeting Ramon Vargas, the 34-year-old financial manager whose money laundering operations provided the foundation for his family's criminal enterprise. Ramon Vargas was responsible for moving over $2 million annually through a network of legitimate businesses, offshore accounts, and cash transactions that had successfully hidden the organization's profits from federal investigators for over 8 years. His death would cripple the Vargas family's ability to convert drug proceeds into usable assets, forcing them to rely on cash transactions that would increase their vulnerability to law enforcement surveillance. Ramon Vargas lived in the expensive condominium in Queen Anne, drove a Lexus sedan that he replaced every 2 years, and maintained the public persona of a successful import-export consultant who explained his wealth through international business connections. His real office was located in a warehouse in Sodo, where he supervised the conversion of drug money into cashier's checks, wire transfers, and legitimate business investments. Ramon was the most cautious member of the Vargas family, varying his routes and schedules unpredictably, using encrypted communication devices, and employing bodyguards for high-risk activities. Miguel Roberts had spent 6 weeks studying Ramon Vargas's security procedures, identifying weaknesses in the financial manager's defenses that could be exploited through his Boeing employee access to industrial chemicals and explosives. Ramon's Lexus was parked in the same downtown garage every Tuesday and Thursday, while he attended meetings with legitimate business partners who unknowingly facilitated his money laundering operations. The garage's security was minimal, relying on cameras that had blind spots Miguel had mapped during multiple surveillance visits disguised as a delivery driver. The explosive device Miguel Roberts constructed for Ramon Vargas represented months of research and experimentation, combining his aircraft manufacturing knowledge with chemistry techniques learned from library books and stolen technical manuals. The bomb was small enough to be concealed beneath the driver's seat, powerful enough to destroy the vehicle completely, and designed with a timing mechanism that would activate when the car's weight sensors indicated the driver had been seated for exactly 3 minutes. Miguel had tested similar devices using remote locations in the Cascade Mountains, perfecting a design that would obliterate forensic evidence while appearing to be an accidental explosion caused by aftermarket modifications or mechanical failure. Miguel Roberts installed the explosive device in Ramon Vargas's Lexus on January 21st at 2:15 in the afternoon. During the lunch break, when the downtown parking garage was nearly empty and security guard attention was focused on monitoring entrance and exit traffic. The installation required 12 minutes of careful work beneath the vehicle, connecting the timing mechanism to the car's electrical system and positioning the explosives for maximum effectiveness. Miguel wore a Boeing maintenance uniform and carried legitimate tools, appearing to be a mechanic performing routine maintenance rather than a killer installing murder weapons. Ramon Vargas returned to his car at 4:37 that afternoon, carrying a briefcase containing financial records for 3 legitimate businesses that served as fronts for money laundering operations worth over $400,000 monthly. He performed his usual security check, examining the vehicle's exterior for signs of tampering, but failed to inspect the undercarriage where Miguel's explosive device was hidden. Ramon settled into the driver's seat, started the engine, and began reviewing notes for his next meeting, while the timing mechanism counted down the final minutes of his life. The explosion occurred at 4:40, exactly 3 minutes after Ramon Vargas had seated himself and activated the weight-sensitive trigger Miguel Roberts had designed. The blast destroyed the Lexus completely, killed Ramon instantly, and caused structural damage to 6 nearby vehicles while sending debris across 4 floors of the parking garage. Seattle Fire Department investigators found evidence suggesting an accidental explosion caused by aftermarket electronic modifications, but the force of the blast had obliterated most forensic evidence that might have revealed the bomb's true nature. Ramon Vargas' death created immediate operational problems for the Vargas organization, since he had been the only member who understood the complete structure of their money laundering network. His encrypted files were destroyed in the explosion. His offshore account information was stored in safety deposit boxes that required his personal attendants to access, and his business relationships with legitimate partners began deteriorating immediately when news of his violent death became public. Carlos Vargas Sr. found himself unable to convert drug proceeds into usable assets, forcing the organization to rely on cash storage and high-risk transactions that increased their vulnerability to law enforcement detection. The Seattle Police Department's investigation into Ramon Vargas's death was more intensive than their response to Luis Morales's apparent medical emergency, recognizing that the financial manager's explosion represented either a sophisticated assassination or a remarkably coincidental accident. Detective Ray Kowalski, the same officer who had declined to prosecute Fernando Morales for sexually assaulting Carmen Roberts, was assigned to lead the investigation, but his inquiries focused on rival criminal organizations and disgruntled business partners rather than considering the possibility that a middle-class family might be systematically targeting the Vargas operation. Elena Roberts waited 28 days after Ramon Vargas' death before proceeding with the third killing, maintaining her methodical approach while allowing time for police attention to shift to other cases and the Vargas family to implement security changes that Antonio Roberts could observe and analyze. During this period, Carmen Roberts continued working at the bakery, listening to conversations about the recent deaths, while appearing to be an innocent employee who had no connection to the violence affecting the neighborhood's criminal community. The third victim was Hector Sandoval, a 42-year-old enforcer who managed street-level drug distribution for the Vargas organization and had been personally involved in over 20 violent assaults during his 8-year association with the family. Hector Sandoval was responsible for maintaining discipline among the dealers and addicts who formed the base of the criminal pyramid, using methods that ranged from beatings to mutilation to ensure absolute obedience and prevent theft of products or profits. David Roberts, the engineering student who had designed the family's explosive devices, developed a specialized method for killing Hector Sandoval that reflected both his technical knowledge and his commitment to the systematic destruction of the Vargas organization. Hector lived alone in a house in Beacon Hill, drove a modified pickup truck, and spent most evenings at a tavern called El Corazon, where he conducted business and intimidated potential rivals through displays of casual violence. The method David chose for Hector Sandoval involved a remotely detonated explosive device concealed inside a case of beer that would be delivered to El Corazon during the enforcer's regular Friday evening visit. The device was designed to detonate when the case was opened, ensuring that Hector would be killed instantly, while any witnesses would be close enough to the explosion to prevent accurate testimony about the circumstances leading to the detonation. David had spent weeks studying the tavern's layout and customer patterns, identifying optimal positioning for maximum lethality while minimizing the risk of collateral casualties among innocent patrons. The delivery occurred on February 18, 1993, when David Roberts approached El Corazon, wearing a delivery company uniform and carrying a case of imported Mexican beer that appeared to be a promotional gift from a distributor seeking to establish business relationships with local establishments. David explained to the bartender that the beer was being provided free to selected taverns, asked that it be given to their best customer as a gesture of goodwill, and left before anyone could examine the case closely enough to discover the explosive device concealed beneath the bottles. Hector Sandoval arrived at El Corazon at 8:20 that evening, following his usual Friday routine of drinking heavily while conducting business with dealers and collecting protection payments from small business owners in the surrounding neighborhood. The bartender presented him with the case of imported beer, explaining it was a promotional gift that had been delivered earlier in the day. Hector, flattered by what he perceived as recognition of his status in the community, decided to open the case immediately and share the beer with associates who were present to witness his generosity. The explosion occurred at 8:34 when Hector Sandoval lifted the lid of the beer case, triggering David Roberts's carefully designed detonation mechanism. The blast killed Hector instantly, seriously injured 3 other patrons who were standing nearby, and caused structural damage to the tavern that required months of repairs. Seattle Fire Department investigators found evidence of an improvised explosive device, but the force of the explosion had destroyed most forensic evidence that might have revealed the bomb's construction or origin. Hector Sandoval's death marked the first time Seattle police recognized they were dealing with a systematic campaign against the Vargas organization rather than a series of unrelated incidents. The combination of Ramon Vargas's car bombing and Hector Sandoval's assassination within 28 days suggested coordination and planning that exceeded the capabilities of rival gangs or disgruntled victims. Detective Kowalski established a task force to investigate what appeared to be a war between organized crime factions, but their focus remained on known criminal organizations, rather than considering the possibility that law-abiding citizens might have declared war on the Vargas family. Carlos Vargas Sr. responded to the deaths of his son and primary enforcer by implementing security measures that included armed bodyguards, armored vehicles, and temporary relocation of key family members to safe houses in other states. The Vargas organization's daily operations became increasingly paranoid and defensive, reducing their income while increasing their vulnerability to law enforcement surveillance. Carlos assigned Fernando Morales to lead the investigation into his family's attackers, never suspecting that the man responsible for triggering the Roberts family's transformation was being targeted for assassination in the next phase of Elena's methodical plan. Elena Roberts waited 42 days after Hector Sandoval's death before moving against Fernando Morales, the man whose sexual assault of Carmen had initiated the systematic destruction of the Vargas organization. Her decision to delay Fernando's assassination reflected strategic rather than emotional considerations, allowing time for the family to complete surveillance of his new security measures, while the police task force focused their attention on investigating connections between the previous killings. Fernando Morales had responded to the deaths of his cousin and associates by moving to a fortified apartment in Capitol Hill, varying his daily routines and traveling with 2 armed bodyguards whenever he left his secured location. His increased caution made direct assassination more difficult, but also isolated him from the support network that had previously made him nearly untouchable. Elena Roberts recognized that Fernando's security measures, designed to protect him from rival criminals, had actually made him more vulnerable to attack by eliminating his connection to witnesses and backup personnel. The method Elena chose for Fernando Morales combined elements of all the techniques her family had developed during their previous assassinations, reflecting both her medical expertise and her desire to ensure that Carmen's attacker died, knowing exactly why he was being killed. Elena had synthesized a modified paralytic compound that would cause total motor function loss while leaving the victim's consciousness intact, allowing Fernando to experience several minutes of helpless terror before respiratory failure caused death. The assassination occurred on April 1st, 1993, when Elena Roberts approached Fernando Morales in the parking lot of a medical clinic in Capitol Hill, where he was receiving treatment for a minor injury sustained during a bar fight the previous week. Elena had learned about Fernando's medical appointment through Carmen's continued surveillance of his associates, had confirmed his schedule through phone calls to the clinic posing as a concerned relative, and had positioned herself to intercept him during the brief window when he would be separated from his bodyguards. Elena Roberts appeared in the parking lot at 2:45 that afternoon, wearing scrubs and a medical identification badge that made her appear to be a healthcare worker, taking a break between shifts. When Fernando Morales emerged from the clinic, she approached him with a clipboard and pen, explaining that she was conducting a patient satisfaction survey and asking if he had a few minutes to provide feedback about his treatment. Fernando, focused on scanning the parking lot for potential threats, agreed to answer her questions while continuing toward his car where his bodyguards were waiting. The injection occurred while Elena was asking Fernando about the quality of care he'd received, delivered through a modified pen while she appeared to be taking notes on his responses. The paralytic compound entered his bloodstream immediately, but was designed with a delayed onset that would allow Elena to establish distance before Fernando realized he had been poisoned. She thanked him for his cooperation, wished him well with his recovery, and walked calmly toward the street while Fernando continued toward his car, unaware that he had less than 4 minutes before total paralysis would begin. Fernando Morales reached his car and was opening the driver's door when the paralytic compound began affecting his nervous system. His first symptoms were mild dizziness and weakness in his hands, which he attributed to pain medication he'd received during his medical treatment. When his legs began trembling and his vision started to blur, Fernando realized something was seriously wrong and called out to his bodyguards for help. Within 60 seconds, he had collapsed against his car, unable to speak or move, but fully conscious and aware that he was dying. Elena Roberts was 3 blocks away when Fernando's bodyguards found him convulsing in the parking lot, his body rigid with paralysis, while his eyes moved frantically in a desperate attempt to communicate. The bodyguards called 911 immediately, but paramedics who arrived 8 minutes later found Fernando in complete respiratory failure, his nervous system shut down by Elena's synthetic compound. He was pronounced dead at 3:22 that afternoon, 37 minutes after Elena Roberts had administered the injection that avenged her daughter's sexual assault. The autopsy performed on Fernando Morales revealed traces of an unknown paralytic agent that had caused complete nervous system failure. But the compound Elena Roberts had synthesized was too sophisticated for standard toxicology analysis to identify its exact composition or origin. King County Medical Examiner Dr. Patricia Hawkins ruled the death a homicide caused by poisoning, but was unable to provide law enforcement with specific information about the murder weapon or the expertise required to manufacture such a compound. Fernando Morales' death sent shockwaves through the Vargas organization and the broader Seattle criminal community, demonstrating that even the most protected members of established crime families were vulnerable to their unknown attackers. Carlos Vargas Sr. increased security measures for all remaining family members, implemented a communication protocol that assumed all phones and meetings were monitored by enemies, and offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the identification of the people responsible for killing his son and associates. The Seattle Police Department's task force expanded their investigation after Fernando's assassination, recognizing that the poisoning represented a level of sophistication that suggested their perpetrators had access to advanced chemistry knowledge and medical expertise. Detective Kowalski began focusing on healthcare workers, university researchers, and former military personnel who might possess the skills necessary to manufacture untraceable poisons and explosive devices. Elena Roberts waited 33 days after Fernando Morales' death before proceeding with the next phase of her plan, which targeted the Vargas organization's middle management and operational personnel. Her strategy was designed to systematically eliminate the family's capacity to function while increasing their paranoia and isolation, making the remaining members increasingly desperate and careless in their security measures. The fourth and fifth killings occurred on May 4, 1993, when Miguel and David Roberts collaborated on a coordinated attack against two mid-level Vargas associates who managed drug distribution in separate territories but frequently met to coordinate supply deliveries and territorial boundaries. Jorge Delgado and Ricardo Fuentes were both in their early 30s, had been working for the Vargas family for over 6 years, and were responsible for managing the street-level dealers who generated approximately 40% of the organization's total revenue. Miguel Roberts had designed a remote-controlled explosive device that could be activated from over 2 miles away, ensuring that the Roberts family could trigger the assassination while maintaining alibis that would exclude them from police investigation. The device was concealed inside a briefcase that David Roberts delivered to the restaurant where Delgado and Fuentes held their weekly coordination meeting, posing as a courier, delivering business documents that had been requested by one of their legitimate business contacts. The explosion occurred at 12:37 on May 4th, while Jorge Delgado and Ricardo Fuentes were reviewing distribution schedules and discussing security concerns related to the recent killings of their associates. The blast destroyed their table completely, killed both men instantly, and injured 6 other restaurant patrons who were having lunch nearby. Seattle Fire Department investigators found clear evidence of a sophisticated explosive device, but the remote detonation system made it impossible to identify the perpetrators or determine how the bomb had been introduced to the location. The coordinated killing of Delgado and Fuentes crippled the Vargas organization's distribution network, eliminating 2 key managers who possessed detailed knowledge of dealer networks, supply routes, and customer relationships that had been developed over years of operation. Carlos Vargas Sr. found himself unable to maintain drug distribution in territories that had generated over $800,000 annually, forcing him to abandon lucrative markets while struggling to reorganize his remaining operations around surviving personnel. Elena Roberts proceeded with increasing frequency after the double assassination, recognizing that the Vargas organization was approaching collapse and that rapid elimination of remaining personnel would prevent them from reorganizing or retaliating effectively. Her next targets were the street-level enforcers and dealers who formed the operational foundation of the criminal network. Men whose deaths would be less noticed by police, but whose elimination would destroy the organization's capacity to generate revenue. The sixth killing occurred on May 18th, when Carmen Roberts approached Tony Medina, a 28-year-old dealer who managed drug sales in the Georgetown area and had been personally involved in the intimidation of small business owners who refused to pay protection money to the Vargas family. Carmen had been watching Tony for over 2 months, learning his routines and identifying opportunities for close contact that could be used to deliver poison without attracting attention from his associates or customers. Carmen Roberts had insisted on personally killing one of the Vargas associates, arguing that she deserved the opportunity to participate directly in avenging her own sexual assault, rather than simply providing intelligence for her family's assassination campaign. Eleanor had initially resisted allowing Carmen to become directly involved in the killings, but eventually recognized that her daughter's motivation and commitment made her an effective operative who could access targets that might be suspicious of other family members. The method Carmen chose for Tony Medina involved a modified version of the paralytic compound Elena had used to kill Fernando Morales, but delivered through a drink rather than an injection to reduce the physical contact required for administration. Carmen had learned that Tony frequented a specific bar in Georgetown every Tuesday evening, always ordering whiskey while conducting business with dealers and customers who formed his distribution network. Carmen Roberts approached Tony Medina at the bar on the evening of May 18th, wearing clothing and makeup that made her appear several years older than her actual age. She positioned herself near his table, engaged him in casual conversation about neighborhood events, and offered to buy him a drink as a gesture of friendliness from someone who appreciated his protection of local businesses. Tony, flattered by attention from an attractive young woman and unaware that she was related to any of his enemies, accepted the drink and continued their conversation while the paralytic compound began affecting his nervous system. Tony Medina began experiencing symptoms 30 minutes after consuming the poisoned whiskey, initially attributing his dizziness and nausea to excessive alcohol consumption. When his coordination began deteriorating and his speech became slurred, other patrons assumed he was intoxicated and helped him to a chair near the back of the bar where he could recover privately. Carmen Roberts had left the establishment 20 minutes earlier, establishing her alibi through conversation with bartenders at a different location while Tony died alone in a Georgetown bar, his nervous system shut down by her synthetic poison. The seventh and eighth killings occurred during the following week, when Antonio and David Roberts collaborated on eliminating 2 more street-level dealers whose territories generated significant revenue for the rapidly weakening Vargas organization. Their methods involved explosive devices concealed in packages delivered to the victims' homes, timed to detonate when the packages were opened during the dealers' normal daily routines. Miguel Roberts continued refining his bomb-making techniques, developing smaller devices that could be concealed inside everyday objects while maintaining sufficient explosive power to ensure quick death and destroy forensic evidence. His expertise had evolved to the point where he could manufacture sophisticated weapons using materials purchased from hardware stores and industrial suppliers, never requiring enough of any single component to attract attention from law enforcement agencies that monitored sales of potential bomb-making materials. Elena Roberts maintained her methodical approach throughout May and June 1993, systematically eliminating Vargas associates according to her carefully planned schedule, while the surviving members of the organization became increasingly paranoid and desperate. Her notebook, hidden beneath her vegetable garden, contained detailed assassination plans for each remaining target, including backup methods and contingency procedures that would ensure completion of her revenge campaign, even if police investigation began focusing on her family. The ninth killing occurred on June 22nd, when Elena Roberts poisoned Carlos Mendez, a 35-year-old money collector who had been responsible for gathering protection payments from small businesses throughout South Seattle. Carlos Mendez had developed a reputation for creative violence against business owners who were late with payments, using methods that included arson, assault, and threats against family members to ensure compliance with the Vargas organization's demands. Elena approached Carlos Mendez at a restaurant where he was meeting with a small business owner who had fallen behind on protection payments. Posing as a health department inspector, conducting a routine survey about food safety practices. She engaged him in casual conversation about the restaurant's cleanliness while appearing to take notes on a clipboard, then administered a fatal dose of synthetic insulin through a modified pen during their handshake when she thanked him for his cooperation with her inspection. Carlos Mendez died 40 minutes later in the restaurant parking lot, his body found by the business owner who had been terrorized by his collection methods for over 3 years. The King County Medical Examiner's Office attributed his death to diabetic shock, never suspecting that Elena Roberts had murdered another member of the organization that had protected her daughter's attacker. By July 1993, the Vargas organization had been reduced from over 40 active members to fewer than 8 surviving associates, their revenue streams eliminated, their territories abandoned, and their leadership structure completely destroyed. Carlos Vargas Sr. found himself isolated in a safe house in Tacoma, protected by 3 remaining bodyguards, while attempting to understand how his powerful criminal empire had been systematically dismantled by unknown enemies who seemed to possess unlimited resources and expertise. The Seattle Police Department's task force had expanded to include federal agents from the FBI and DEA, recognizing that the coordinated campaign against the Vargas family represented either an extremely sophisticated rival organization or a level of civilian vigilantism that posed serious threats to public safety. Detective Kowalski continued focusing his investigation on known criminal groups, never considering that a middle-class family from Rainier Valley might be responsible for the most effective elimination of organized crime in Seattle history. Elena Roberts accelerated her assassination schedule during July and August, recognizing that prolonged investigation would eventually lead police to examine the backgrounds of Vargas organization victims and potentially discover Carmen's sexual assault report from the previous year. Her remaining targets included Carlos Vargas Sr., his 3 bodyguards, and 2 associates who had fled Seattle but remained accessible through surveillance methods Antonio Roberts had developed during his months of intelligence gathering. The 10th through 13th killings occurred during a coordinated attack on August 15, 1993, when the entire Roberts family participated in eliminating Carlos Vargas Sr. and his 3 bodyguards at their Tacoma safe house. The assault combined explosive devices, sniper fire, and close-quarters combat techniques that demonstrated the family's transformation from law-abiding citizens into a highly effective killing unit capable of military-style operations. Miguel Roberts had spent weeks studying the safe house's security measures, identifying weaknesses in their defensive positions while developing weapons specifically designed for the assault. David Roberts constructed explosive devices that could breach the building's reinforced doors and windows, while Antonio Roberts provided real-time intelligence about guard positions and patrol schedules. Elena Roberts coordinated the attack from a command position that allowed her to monitor police radio frequencies and provide tactical guidance to her family during the operation. Carmen Roberts insisted on participating directly in the assault that would kill the leader of the organization that had protected her attacker. arguing that her presence was necessary to complete the circle of revenge that had begun with Fernando Morales's sexual assault 14 months earlier. Elena initially resisted involving Carmen in the most dangerous phase of their campaign, but eventually recognized that her daughter's commitment and training made her an essential member of their assault team. The attack began at 11:47 p.m. when David Roberts detonated explosive devices that disabled the safe house's electrical system and communications equipment, leaving Carlos Vargas Sr. and his bodyguards isolated and unable to call for assistance. Miguel Roberts provided sniper support from a position 300 yards away, using a modified hunting rifle to eliminate guards who attempted to establish defensive positions around the building's perimeter. Elena and Carmen Roberts approached the safe house from the rear, using night vision equipment and suppressed weapons to infiltrate the building, while Carlos Vargas Sr. and his remaining bodyguards were focused on threats from the front and sides. Their assault was methodical and precise, eliminating resistance through coordinated fire while advancing toward the secured room where Carlos had taken refuge with his last surviving associate. Carlos Vargas Sr. died at 12:23 a.m. on August 16, 1993, killed by Elena Roberts using the same paralytic compound she had developed for Fernando Morales's assassination. Elena wanted the Vargas patriarch to experience the same helpless terror that her daughter had felt during her sexual assault, to understand that his family's criminal empire was being destroyed by people he had considered beneath his notice. The final two killings occurred during September 1993, when Antonio and David Roberts tracked down the last surviving members of the Vargas organization who had fled Seattle after the safe house assault, but remained within reach of the Roberts family's expanding operational capabilities. These final assassinations required travel to Portland and Vancouver, demonstrating the family's commitment to completing their revenge campaign, regardless of the resources and risks involved. Elena Roberts completed her methodical plan on September 28, 1993, 13 months after Fernando Morales had sexually assaulted Carmen in the bakery parking lot. The Vargas organization had been completely eliminated, its territories abandoned, its criminal enterprises destroyed, and its members either dead or fled beyond the reach of law enforcement and rival organizations. Elena buried her notebooks beneath her vegetable garden that evening, marking the end of the most systematic revenge campaign in Pacific Northwest history. The Roberts family returned to their normal routines in October 1993, maintaining the facade of law-abiding citizens while the Seattle Police Department continued investigating the elimination of the Vargas organization. Elena Roberts resumed her full schedule at Swedish Medical Center. Miguel Roberts returned to his regular shifts at Boeing. David Roberts continued his engineering studies at the University of Washington. Carmen Roberts kept working at the bakery, and Antonio Roberts began his senior year at Franklin High School. The investigation into the Vargas killings continued for over 2 years, involving local police, federal agents, and organized crime specialists who analyzed every aspect of the assassination campaign without ever identifying the Roberts family as perpetrators. Detective Kowalski eventually concluded that the killings had been carried out by a rival criminal organization that had since left Seattle, a theory that satisfied federal authorities while allowing the case to be classified as solved despite the complete absence of arrests or prosecutions. Elena Roberts lived with her family in the house on South Henderson Street for another 8 years before dying of cancer in 2001, taking the secrets of their revenge campaign to her grave while maintaining her reputation as a dedicated healthcare worker and devoted mother. Miguel Roberts worked at Boeing until his retirement in 2010, never speaking about the months when he had manufactured bombs in his garage while learning to kill people with the same precision he had once applied to building aircraft. David Roberts graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in mechanical engineering, married his college girlfriend, and established a successful consulting business that specialized in structural analysis and safety systems. He raised 3 children in Bellevue, coached youth soccer teams, and served on the school district's safety committee while never revealing that he had once been one of the most effective bomb makers in Washington state history. Carmen Roberts completed her education at Seattle Central Community College, earned a degree in social work, and spent her career helping victims of domestic violence and sexual assault recover from trauma while building new lives. She married a police officer in 1998, raised 2 daughters who became teachers, and established a foundation that provided counseling services to assault victims whose cases were not adequately investigated by law enforcement agencies. Antonio Roberts finished high school with a perfect grade point average, earned a full scholarship to Stanford University, and became a successful investigative journalist who specialized in exposing corruption in law enforcement and criminal justice systems. His articles about police failures to protect assault victims and prosecute connected criminals won several national awards, while never revealing that his own family had once taken justice into their own hands when legal systems failed to provide protection. The house on South Henderson Street, where the Roberts family had planned and executed their revenge campaign, was sold in 2003, 2 years after Eleanor's death, with the new owners never learning that their basement had once served as a weapons laboratory, and their backyard had hidden detailed assassination plans for 16 men. The vegetable garden where Eleanor Roberts had buried her notebooks was converted into a flower bed, the notebooks themselves discovered and destroyed by Miguel Roberts before the family moved to separate homes across the Puget Sound region. Seattle's Rainier Valley neighborhood gradually gentrified during the following decades, with rising property values and demographic changes that erased most traces of the criminal organizations that had once controlled territory through violence and intimidation. The bakery where Carmen Roberts had worked closed in 2005. The Starbucks where Luis Morales had died was renovated and reopened under different management, and El Corazon Tavern, where Hector Sandoval had been killed, was demolished to make room for condominiums that housed tech workers who had never heard of the Vargas family. The Seattle Police Department's files on the Vargas investigation were transferred to cold case storage in 2008. Their 16 thick folders containing thousands of pages of reports, photographs, and evidence analyses that documented the systematic elimination of organized crime in South Seattle, without ever identifying the middle-class family who had accomplished what years of law enforcement efforts had failed to achieve. Detective Ray Kowalski retired in 2004. Never learning that his decision not to prosecute Carmen Roberts' sexual assault had triggered the most methodical revenge campaign in city history. Miguel Roberts died peacefully in 2018 at age 78, surrounded by grandchildren who knew him as a gentle man who had spent his career building airplanes and tending his garden, never suspecting that their grandfather had once been capable of manufacturing sophisticated explosive devices and conducting military-style assaults against organized crime figures. His funeral was attended by over 200 people, including Boeing colleagues, neighbors, and family friends who remembered him as a devoted husband and father who had embodied the values of hard work, family loyalty, and community service. Carmen Roberts continues living in Seattle as of 2025, now 52 years old, and serving as director of a non-profit organization that provides legal advocacy for sexual assault victims whose cases are not adequately investigated by police departments. Her work has helped secure convictions against over 40 perpetrators while establishing precedents for more thorough investigation of crimes involving connected or influential attackers. She has never spoken publicly about her family's response to her own assault, but colleagues note her particular intensity when handling cases where law enforcement agencies seem reluctant to pursue prosecution. David Roberts moved to California in 2010, where he works as a structural engineering consultant for aerospace companies while raising his family in a suburban community where his neighbors know him as a devoted father who coaches Little League Baseball and volunteers with local environmental organizations. His expertise in explosive devices and demolitions is employed exclusively for legitimate purposes, helping design safer buildings and industrial facilities while contributing to projects that protect public safety rather than threaten it. Antonio Roberts became one of America's most respected investigative journalists, working for major newspapers and magazines while maintaining his specialty in exposing corruption and incompetence in criminal justice systems. His articles have contributed to the prosecution of dozens of corrupt officials and the reform of police departments that had failed to protect vulnerable citizens from connected criminals. He has never written about his family's elimination of the Vargas organization, but his career has been dedicated to ensuring that legal systems provide the protection and justice that they had failed to deliver during his teenage years in Seattle. The Roberts family's transformation from law-abiding citizens to methodical killers represents one of the most remarkable examples of vigilante justice in American criminal history, demonstrating how ordinary people can develop extraordinary capabilities when legal systems fail to provide protection from predatory criminals. Their success in eliminating an entire criminal organization while avoiding detection by sophisticated law enforcement agencies illustrates both the potential effectiveness of civilian revenge and the dangers posed when justice systems fail to serve the communities they are designed to protect. Elena Roberts's methodical approach to destroying the Vargas organization revealed strategic thinking and operational capabilities that exceeded the performance of professional law enforcement agencies that had been attempting to combat organized crime for decades. Her success was built on advantages that legal investigators lacked: unlimited commitment to achieving their objectives, willingness to employ any methods necessary for success, and freedom from legal constraints that limited police operations. The Roberts family's transformation also demonstrated how ordinary citizens could acquire sophisticated criminal skills when motivated by the failure of legal systems to provide justice for victims of connected criminals. The elimination of the Vargas organization created a power vacuum in South Seattle's criminal landscape that was gradually filled by smaller, less organized groups who lacked the resources and political connections that had made the Vargas family nearly untouchable. The Roberts family's success in destroying established organized crime ultimately contributed to improved public safety in their neighborhood, though their methods represented a complete rejection of legal processes and democratic principles that form the foundation of civil society. The case of the Roberts family raises fundamental questions about the relationship between citizens and legal systems, the limits of acceptable response to institutional failure, and the circumstances under which vigilante justice might be considered morally justified despite its rejection of democratic processes. Their story demonstrates both the potential effectiveness of civilian revenge and the profound dangers posed when ordinary people conclude that legal systems cannot provide protection from criminals who exploit corruption and intimidation to avoid accountability for their actions. Elena Roberts died knowing that her family had achieved complete victory against the organization that had protected her daughter's attacker. But she also understood that their success had required them to abandon fundamental principles of law and morality that distinguished civilized society from criminal organizations. Her final years were spent living with the knowledge that she had saved her community from predatory criminals while transforming her own family into killers whose methods differed from their enemies only in their motivations and ultimate objectives. The Roberts family's campaign against the Vargas organization remains one of the most systematic and successful examples of vigilante justice in modern American history, demonstrating how ordinary citizens can develop extraordinary capabilities when confronted with the complete failure of legal systems to protect victims from connected criminals who exploit corruption and intimidation to avoid consequences for their actions.